Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
I'm Kate O'Connor. I work in the district office in communications, and again, I really appreciate you coming out on a rainy night. I wanted to welcome you to tonight's meet and greet with the Bellows Falls Union High School principal candidate, Kelly O'Ryan. And just to give a little bit of background about Kelly's roles here. Kelly serves as the Bellows Falls Union High School Restorative Practices Coordinator and WNESU's Title IX Coordinator. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Mrs. O'Ryan will be sharing a presentation tonight and then be available for a dialogue and questions from those attending tonight. We really appreciate all those who have made the time and the investment in attending tonight to gain a sense of Mrs. O'Ryan's work and approach to high school administration and education. There will be an opportunity to capture feedback tonight we have paper forms and we also have QR codes. So it just depends on how you want to go about that. So without further ado, Kelly O'Ryan.
Thank you. Folks hear me okay? Is this an okay volume?
Oh, no.
No.
There's no mic.
There's no mic. Maybe let me move this forward. How about I come around and I'll just stop back and forth. Is that better for everybody? Okay, great. So I wanted to start as someone who's fairly new to the WNESU, just to give a quick summary in terms of who I am, right? I know I'm new to the district, fairly new to public education, and I want to speak to some of those pieces before we get started in talking a little bit more about some of the things that I have learned in my short time here, and certainly some of the things that have been reinforced and that I've learned throughout the interview process as well. Things that I see as really important priority for the principal in particular of the high school moving forward. And then obviously I want to leave a lot of time for questions and dialogue about next steps. Okay. I want to quickly summarize again, my skills and expertise. So for the last 15 years, I have worked in education, primarily in Putney, Vermont, so right up the road. I do consider myself local. I worked 10 years as a faculty member and as an administrator at the Greenwood School in Putney. And then 5 years in higher education at the Landmark College, also in Putney. In both of those institutions, again, I've served as a teaching faculty, but also served as a dean of students and director of equity and belonging. And within those two roles, I oversaw pretty much every facet of school community and day-to-day logistics and operations of the schools, from budgets, student conduct, working with faculty and staff, serving as a department chair, kind of seeing the whole continuum there. The other thing I'd note about my time in Greenwood in particular is as a faculty member and then moving into administration, when I arrived at Greenwood, at the time we were a middle school. We were exclusively a middle school that worked with boys exclusively who were neurodivergent, so autism, ADHD, language-based learning differences. And right around 2010, actually, we had a decision point as a community whether we were going to move in the direction of becoming a co-ed school or move in the direction of evolving into a high school. And so our headmaster at the time, head of school, brought the full community together and a decision was made to move in the direction of evolving into a high school. So as a faculty member and then as an administrator, I actually had a front row seat to building a high school in every sense of the word, from the curricular to the co-curricular to the code of conduct, including a lot of emphasis and work on what comes after high school, right? So supporting our students with the whole continuum of post-secondary attainment options there at Greenwood. I think another really important thing to note is, for those of you who are not familiar with Greenwood or Landmark, Both of those institutions work exclusively with neurodivergent populations, so exclusively students with disabilities. I would say that greatly informs who I am as a person and as an educator and as an administrator. So at the core of those two experiences, I have a profound respect and understanding for how a school community, right, a school culture can influence student achievement, student success, right? And so many of the students and families that I worked with in both of those institutions had failed out of so many other schools across the country, right? And so when they came to Landmark or they came to Greenwood, they were broken. They were sad, they were scared, they were afraid of failure. We were kind of the last stop for them on their academic journey. And so again, I carry a real heightened sensitivity to how schools, teaching, peer influence, right? Academic achievement, all of those pieces can kind of come together. And when the right environment is created, right, in consultation with community, including with students, I've seen firsthand over and over again how students who were at rock bottom, right, families who are at rock bottom, go on to thrive in ways they never could have imagined. So again, that I carry that sensitivity to my core in my educational experience. I think another thing that really defines who I am as a person, but also as an administrator, is really centering student voice and choice. That is, I think, anyone that you speak to that I've worked with, I think if you were to ask them what is one of the key defining features of who I am, I think I would like to think, and I've been told, that's one of the pieces. And I think that's important to center in this conversation because in my short time here in the district, I hear that over and over and over again from our students in the building, that they don't feel heard, they don't feel supported, they don't feel like they have much of any agency in their day-to-day or their futures, right? And I think if we really want to get at academic achievement, we want to get at post-secondary attainment, we want to get at turning down behavior, we want to get at all these other pieces, we really got to get at listening to our students, right? And not in a token kind of way, like, okay, we have this plan, what do you think? Check, right? No, that's important. What I mean by student choice and voice is really like partnering with them at every step of the process, right? So there's some schools, some districts even that partner with students in the budget design, right? And I'm not saying necessarily that students should have full reign over the, the school budget, but they should, right? Because our budgets are a reflection of our community priorities and our community values, in my opinion. They should have a seat at the table when those budgets are designed and prioritized and discussed, right? And so I think that is one of the things that I would want to see done differently or strengthened, right, in moving forward. The other thing that I think would center or kind of run through all of my experiences, right, is this equity lens, right? And by equity, I mean not centering one particular group of students or one particular need over another. It's really about cultivating a mindset in our community in everything that we do, from our policies to our budgets to our curriculum to our co-curriculum, right? In who's here, who's not, why is that, right? Like unrelenting curiosity about what's working for our students and is it working for everyone? And if it's not, then we need to push pause and we need to talk about that and to perhaps program differently or provide some more tailored or different supports in moving forward. So those are the 4 key pieces I would center.
Kelly?
Yeah.
I'm hearing in the background it's a little hard to hear.
Okay. Is it better if I step forward to here?
I just need to tell the person to go.
Okay. Is that better?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for pausing. Appreciate it. So student voice and choice. So again, this is something that I've observed, right, in my time here, but also heard over and over again in my role, particularly in my role as Equity and Title IX coordinator. I've heard a lot. I work a lot with students and with families, right? Oftentimes when things aren't going well, when something in the environment isn't working for them, and oftentimes what they say in the course of those meetings is, again, they don't feel heard. And so I think it's really important that we create and strengthen these opportunities for student perspectives to come forward. I also think our students are telling us a lot, right? Like if we actually listen, right, to what the data is saying, right, and take the time, or the data are saying, if we take the time to listen, right, and sit with it, but also engage the students in kind of helping us understand what it is they're saying, and then to partner in what to do next, right? I think we really need to do that. And there's these great examples of schools out there that are doing this work, including here in Vermont. I think one example of that is every 2 years, right, the school districts around the country do something called the Youth Risk Behavior, the YRBS. I can't remember all the acronyms off the top of my head. But almost the entire school takes that every 2 years. And every year and a half or so, we get a report back from the CDC that kind of outlines what our students are saying, how they're feeling, what are they needing, right? And there's really important things that our students are telling us in that one example of data, right? And so I think, in my opinion, we need to do a better job of looking at that, again, and partnering with the students, but also reporting back out, right, to the community and to the students. This is what we heard. Are we hearing this correctly, right? And what needs to come next, right? So there's a level of accountability to things that I think is lacking, in my opinion. And again, I really feel like that's an important thing to strengthen moving forward. And the last piece, right, is really creating curricular and co-curricular opportunities for students that are relevant, innovative, and accessible, right? Again, this is a key theme that I keep hearing from students, is they don't always feel that every part of their day meets those three kind of keywords that I think are really critical. So this next piece, the second bucket that I think really informs, in my opinion, what should come next, right, is a stronger emphasis on this idea of belonging, right? And when you look at the research in student experience, whether it's student achievement or connection with peers or showing up in the building, right? If a student or staff member doesn't feel like they belong in a community, they're far less likely to come. They're far less likely to have academic success. They're far less likely to persist all the way to graduation, right? And that's really one of the most important things that we're doing here, right? Is supporting our students in crossing that threshold with their head held high, right? With a very clear understanding of who they are as a person, who they are as a learner, and how they fit into the world moving forward, right? So they can leave with confidence. But if a student does not feel a sense of belonging, they're far less likely to reach that threshold with those kind of metrics in place. And one of the key things that we need to get at, right, is that sense of safety. I think any of us, it's not just true for students, if we don't feel a sense of safety in our environment, we're not going to feel a sense of belonging. And our students, again, when we sit and listen to what some of the data is saying, or the data are saying, right, some of our students, a lot of our students are saying that they don't feel safe crossing the threshold of the building. So we have to be accountable to figuring out why that is, right? And again, working with them and working with the larger community in figuring out a plan forward. They deserve to feel safe in this building and in this community. Some of that sense of belonging, again, goes back to peer acceptance, right? In students feel a sense of belonging when they feel like their peers see and respect who they are in every sense of the word, right? The other thing that I think is really critical to center is teachers, right? Teachers in this building also need to feel a sense of belonging. And in my short time here, I would say that many do not feel as though they belong in this community. Specifically, they feel a lack of support from central office, a lack of support from the board, a lack of support from the community, right? And so somehow we need to work together to kind of push the reset button and revamp those relationships, or our teachers are going to continue to leave. They're not going to feel a sense of agency or connection, and we all lose. The students lose. So we have to center that as part of the next step as well. So student behavior, again, I see that as being a really critical point of focus for the upcoming year and years moving forward. And it's something I've heard a lot from peers, students in the building, and from staff in the building is something that really needs to be a priority. And I think it's really important that when we talk about student behavior, that we're using a very tailored lens in how we talk about it, including, in my opinion, right? Students will do well if they can. When they're misbehaving, it means something's not working, right? And so we have to sit with the why, right? Instead of just ISS or pushing them out, right? Or further kind of shaming someone, right? We need to understand what is it they're trying to communicate? What is it that's not working for them in the environment? And again, we got to hold space for the why. I know this district and a lot of districts in the state and the region are talking a lot about trauma and trauma-informed schools. And in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of people who are paying attention to the research around trauma-informed schools, you can't call yourself a trauma-informed school if you haven't done a deep dive into your discipline system and how you work with and respond and support student behavior. So I think that's another really critical thing. And, I know the district has had a strong push on restorative practices, restorative justice, right? That's also a part of my background, and I think a really important part to center in this work in kind of refining how we work with student behavior in the building. Doesn't mean that a restorative intervention is always the right intervention, but I believe it should always be centered as an opportunity. Students should always be supported in receiving the education and support that they need around the behavior, but not stopping there. We have to include a focus on the reintegration. We have to make a student feel and know that even though they made a harmful choice, we're still with them. We still want them, right? They still matter. They still belong, right? And so we have to, I think, hold more intentional spaces for those conversations and support. Excuse me. And the last one I would get at is community. I think this is a really, really critical part of what I've heard and what I've observed. And I think central to this idea of community is one of trust. In my opinion, and I think in the opinion of almost everyone I've spoken to, there's not a lot of trust in this district. Doesn't matter which direction you're coming at it from, that trust doesn't exist. And I don't know why, right? I have some opinions, but again, I haven't been here long enough to be able to pinpoint where things got off track, right? But I think there's general consensus here that there's not a lot of trust in the community. And without that, we're kind of stuck, right? And so that trust, rebuilding of trust really has to, in my opinion, be a core focus of what comes next. And I think some of the key ways in which we can do that really get at this kind of data literacy and accountability, like I was talking about, right? We need to do a better job of asking. We need to be a better job of sharing, like this is what we're hearing, right? And then partnering on what comes next, right? So and with that, or underneath that, is really transparency. That I think as a district in every level, there's a lot more we can be doing to be transparent about the state of things, right? And in my opinion, those are two key ways to kind of start rebuilding some of the trust that's really necessary to move the needle forward for our students. So again, a little bit about who I am, some of what I'm hearing, and some of my thoughts about next steps. So I welcome question, conversation. I don't know, Kate, is there like a facilitator, or do I facilitate this part? I'm happy, whatever works.
Yeah, I think
Okay. Questions? Yes.
Where do you foresee, Carrie Kennedy, principal of Central School, where do you foresee transitions? So I think that's a big part. So coming in from the middle school into the high school, how would you foresee planning something to support students that are new to the school and cutting and telling them?
Did everyone hear that question? So the question, and so you can check my understanding too, is how would I support the transition from the middle school to the high school? Yeah, okay. Well, for starters, I know that there's already a great program in place here at the high school, the Freshman Academy, where there's any number of stakeholders that regularly meet throughout the summer prior to student arrival, that really work to develop relationships with the student, develop relationships with the family, create partnerships with the kind of guidance counselors and maybe core faculty at the middle school, with some of those same stakeholders here at the high school, to provide as seamless of a transition as possible. I haven't had a front row seat to a lot of those programs, right, or structures. I think it's phenomenal that we have it. Are there growth areas within it? possibly. But I think I think that model exists, and I think it's critical to maintain. Maybe it needs to be revamped a little bit. I don't know. Yeah.
Everyone's so silent. I guess,
Yes.
so I'm Amanda Damaris. I'm a paraprofessional in the district, have been for 5 years, but I subbed for like 8 years prior to that. My experience, like, so I've had all the trainings about trauma informed and restorative practices and stuff.
You're good. Do you want to turn and I'll...
So I was just giving her my background first and saying that I'm trained in the whole restorative justice and all that. What I've seen is a lack of accountability on student behaviors. We talk about there's the trauma, we need to help them and everything. And I get that. I've worked in a behavioral program. I understand that there's reasons for behaviors.
Mhm.
However, I don't feel as though there's a follow through for those behaviors. So, for instance, kids getting bullied, we take the kid out of the situation instead of fixing the kids that are doing the bullying. Or damages are literally done to the building, or staff are being sent to emergency rooms. I've been sent to the doctor myself. I've gotten vaccines I shouldn't have needed. And yet there's nothing done because either the child has a 504 or an IEP, or because there's some sort of trauma. And so there's no accountability. And I see that really becoming an issue to the degree where I'm not even sure if I want to work in education anymore. And so my question for you is, how do we make sure that we are still dealing with the trauma-based, the trauma-informed, but still actually having some accountability? Because what I feel, we lower the expectation until they can succeed. They decide, oh, I don't like that expectation, we drop it more. Oh, I don't like that, we drop it more. We're not holding the students accountable, so they're not actually progressing forward. I'm actually seeing regression quite a bit. How would you propose planning that? How does the restorative justice and the trauma informed and all that turn it around? I mean, if they're literally destroying school buses, how do we fix that? There should be some cost to that, not just like, oh, okay, well, we forgive them and move on. That's my take on it. And so I'm wondering how that happens. And like I said, you know, a lot of times the students that are doing their jobs and are doing the right things are the ones that seem to be getting punished, while the ones that are not get special treatment. They get rewards for doing everyday normal things.
So I think a couple of things. One, and I think there's going to be, with the special ed rule changes, right, coming down the pipeline, I think effective July 1 across the state, right, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on tier 1 proactive work in the classroom and in the school community. And I think with that work, we have to be taking kind of a renewed look at restorative practices and how we operationalize that as a district. I think one of the things that can happen, and it happens in a lot of schools, it's not just happening here, is that people have this misunderstanding that restorative practices is all about high support. It's also about high accountability, right? And these things, they need to happen together, right? And so I think some of this goes back to maybe there's not a rich enough understanding about what the practice is intended to do. And what I would say is that, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? Like, every behavior doesn't necessarily start with a restorative intervention, in my opinion, right? Like, sometimes the behavior is so significant, or it is a pattern of, right? It is an escalating pattern. And it's very clear that the restorative interventions, the education, the support that have been provided aren't enough, or they're not working, right? And that people are being harmed in the process, right? So that absolutely has to be taken into consideration. So it sounds like there needs to be more time, right, as a district to like push pause, to like surface these types of things, right? And to kind of recalibrate what restorative practices actually are. In terms of that work and students with a 504 and IEP, no doubt that there are added, I would say, laws that govern how we can or cannot respond, right? That certainly make it harder for building administrators, right? The intent behind those laws is to protect those students, right? I get that. And it doesn't mean that they can't be held accountable in different ways, right? And I know as an administrators around the district, we've been working a lot with Heather Lynn or Lynn and Lynn, who are our legal team up in Burlington, around this exact issue, right? Is this intersection of discipline, right, and student behavior and special ed law, and how can we do things differently while still honoring our obligations around the law, still honoring our obligations around meaningfully addressing harm, right, in the hopes of getting the behaviors to stop, right? So I know that work is happening, but it sounds like we need to do a better job of opening up the conversation, right? Because this is a very important and valid thing. I am sorry that that's been part of your experience today, but yes, Molly.
Kelly, what made you apply for the principal's position? What was the
That's a very good question. Originally signed on for this role with great enthusiasm to serve as the restorative practices and equity in Title IX for the district. I was super excited about the opportunity to kind of move into public ed, having been kind of on the periphery of it for so long. I'd heard so much about it, right? And so I was excited to be here. But I also recognized that it likely, due to grant cycles and things like that, was a 2-year opportunity. And so I was always kind of thinking about what next, right? As I was coming up on that midway point. And to be totally transparent, right, I had been approached by another school about a head of school opportunity. And I applied and was offered it about 8 weeks ago. And it was right around that time that I was starting to see a ton of reports of harm coming in, right? And at first you might think, well, why would that be a reason to stay, right? One of the things I talked about was trust, right? And in my opinion, the broken trust that exists in the district, and one of the things I've been working on is rebuilding a reporting mechanism. So when harms happen, the faculty, staff, students, family, community members had more accessible ways to report out on those harms so they could get more timely support. And so one of the things that was happening right around that time I was offered that opportunity is we were starting to get a ton more reports, right? And I was like, the system is starting to work. From parents in particular, we're starting to report out on harms that had been happening, not just this year, but like, hey, there was this thing that happened 2 years ago, right? And I feel that we need someone in the building, someone in the district to know this, because we're ready to talk, because they're starting to believe, right, that people are listening and that are going to take things seriously. And so I decided to decline that opportunity to stay in the equity role because I felt like there was light happening and I really wanted to see that through. And then about a month after that I made that decision to stay, I knew that this position was going to be opening up. And then I was actually in Alaska, and I saw that the district had posted for an interim, right? And as someone who in my administrative roles have run a number of these searches, right? It was kind of a signal from the district, right? That if you're posting an interim, it means you're not getting a lot over here, right? And they needed to expand the scope of possibility. And I thought, well, seems like there's this big need. I've clearly made my commitment to remaining. I've been an administrator. I feel like there's things that I can help, support. I feel very confident in my ability, so I'll throw my hat in the ring. That is why I'm here. So that's kind of how that came to be. Again, I feel like based on what I'm hearing, I feel confident in my skill set and my background to meet those needs. So, yeah.
Hi, Cynthia Graham. I'm curious as to your experience with administrative practices dealing with a whole building full of people underneath you.
Great question. So I would say both at Greenwood and at Landmark, I supervised very large and diverse teams. So at Landmark, my most recent administrative role, I oversaw athletics, outdoor recreation, our centers for diversity and inclusion, new student and family orientation programming. I oversaw our residential life and all those kind of building operations. I feel like I'm forgetting one. New student activities. So I had a huge portfolio. I think altogether probably about 50 or so staff, right? So direct reports, indirect reports, and related budgets. And I would say I loved it. I loved it very much. Yeah, and I would say a similar but maybe smaller scale at Greenwood, just that we were, Landmark was about 400 students, just to give you a sense of scale. Greenwood was about 50, right? So certainly there was a 2-to-1 teacher to student ratio there. So there was still a lot of staff, but just by scale, it was probably a team of 12 to 18 at any given time. So yeah, I would say a lot of experience in the day-to-day operations. Yes.
Mary Lucia, and I'm just wondering if you can give us some examples of how you would go about building community and trust amongst the students, the staff, the community. Just give us some examples.
Sure. Again, I think I'd circle back to some of those data and transparency pieces. I feel like starting with the students, because I think that's the most critical place to begin, is they often report that they've made a lot of requests or they brought a lot of concerns forward and they never hear back on something. So oftentimes, in my opinion, things have happened, right? But we miss a step, right, in circling back and communicating what the outcome was, right? And so I've seen lots of different initiatives. One that I really like and feel strongly about is UVM. I saw this initially at UVM. We brought it a bit to Landmark. Is they would have bulletin boards around the community where students would submit a concern or submit a question, right? And it would be up there on the bulletin board. And the administrator, right, or the person who oversaw or most directly intersected with that question, right, would write a response. And it wasn't just given to that particular student, right? It was posted transparently and in multiple places, right? And so that's one, I think, tangible way, which I think is really important for the students to kind of see that. Going back to the YRBS, that data tool that I mentioned earlier that we do where we're collecting all these really important things about student experience, there's actually these great organizations called Getting to Why here in Vermont, where you have a staff or community member mentor, right, who works with a group of students and teaches these students how to sit with that data, right, and then co-create a plan for moving forward, right? So there's, I think, interventions like that would be really critical and powerful in terms of changing the trust piece, right? And I think building out in similar ways for staff and faculty as well is like always looking for ways to maximize stakeholder involvement wherever possible and striving for consensus, though sometimes that's not always possible, right? So I do believe very strongly in fair process. So if we can't get consensus, still bring the people together, right? Everyone who's going to be impacted by a decision should be in the room, right? We should talk about it. Ideas should be put forward, and sometimes consensus can't be reached and someone has to make a decision, but that person needs to be accountable in circling back and sharing out what that decision is, right? And again, I feel like that's a piece that's sometimes lacking here, not just here, lots of places, right? But I feel that principle of fair process really governs a lot of what I've done, or how I've operated as an administrator. Sure. Here and then David. Yeah.
So I love your background and experience with neurodivergent students. I'm excited about the possibility of what you might bring to the high school. I'm curious about the other end of the spectrum and those in between and how you meet the needs of our higher achieving students and sort of support them in meeting their bar.
Yeah, great question. I think, one of the primary laws that governs how we are required to operate, right? Free and appropriate public education. And I think people get really fixated on that word appropriate in all the wrong ways sometimes, right? Appropriate, in my opinion, right, means, again, meeting every student where they're at, right? And so that includes not forgetting the students who want to do the early start, right, college programs, or who have the ability and the interest, right, to maybe graduate from high school practically with an associate's in hand, right? So I think we need to be working with greater intention around dual enrollment in the building. There's some great partnerships available with CCB where we can get our teachers trained, right, to provide more dual enrollment opportunities face to face, like in the building, to better support those needs, not at the expense of the AP opportunities, right? I do very strongly believe that students should still have choice, right? But again, I think yeah, we have to be planning thoughtfully for the whole continuum of need in the building. Yes.
Okay. Out by the kindness wall, there is a marvelous billboard statement from a gentleman named Scott Adams. And Scott Adams, as you're probably well aware, is the proprietor of Dilbert. And because of some of his blatantly racist remarks, he's openly advocated for separation of the races and made no attempt to retract any of those statements. He's been canceled in most of the newspapers in the United States. I have suggested to Principal Broadley that maybe that's a good topic for student council to take up and have a discussion around. But I am curious as to whether in your current role you would take any sort of position around the appropriateness of providing literally a podium for Scott Adams under our roof in this building.
Very good question. I think kind of in line with what I've centered before, right? A decision of that nature has to be made by the community, right? And so it's not one person should be making that decision.
And that's why I suggested to go to student council, who would
Right.
seem to be relevant players.
Sure.
So how would you handle it?
Well, I also want to honor student agency, right? That student council, in my understanding of how it's currently operationalized, is more in programs, right? And in the day-to-day. I would never, as an administrator, I would always want to consult with student council, but not just student council, because I think there's other forums for student leadership that could be created.
What might those be?
Well, I think where sometimes school communities get off track is that I think there's a lot of students who might be interested in student council who, for any number of great reasons, don't put their hat in the ring, right? Because I've heard from students in the building, sometimes they feel like it's a popularity contest, right? So they don't even bother to try because they don't think they'll get it.
I've interrupted.
So-
I'm a lot more interested in the people who are on the in-school suspension list.
I
It's
agree.
the ones who
I
school
agree.
isn't working for.
I
and
agree.
need to hear from.
I wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree with that statement, right? That we look at data, we listen to our student leaders. I don't think we do a good enough job listening to the students who are making it super clear through their behavior that the environment's not working for them. Whether that's ISS or OSS, but I feel particularly strong about students who aren't showing up in the building. So our students who are noted as truant, right? All these data sets that we have that are painting problematic pictures about school climate, it's not even capturing what they might have to add because they're not in the building, right? And so I feel very strongly, right, that we have to be very intentional about building up those additional opportunities, but also seeking out those perspectives when those kind of formal things don't exist, if that makes
One
sense.
final question.
Yeah.
If you were principal in this building in the fall, what would your timeline be on Scott Adams and how would you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would start with the established leadership in the building, right? And by leadership, I mean student leadership, like looking for existing mechanisms, right? But community forum, faculty meetings, right? Like there's any number, the diversity and equity committee, there's a lot of existing bodies, right? You could easily go to and consult on the matter. But it, again, kind of going to what we were just talking about, we would also need to be sure that we're creating other spaces for other perspectives to be included before a decision's made. Again, I don't think one person should necessarily be driving that decision.
In that timeline again?
I think it would. Again, if we're working with existing and building out, I don't know, by December. I don't have I intentionally left my phone in my office. I don't know about timing.
So we have about 5
Oh, perfect.
minutes. Another
Good on
question?
Yeah. I'm gonna need water.
That's what I was gonna ask, so I don't mean to interrupt, I know that we have a board meeting scheduled at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
But I'm gonna defer to Molly if you push that off, and want to keep going.
I would hope that my board members would let this go on for as long as the meeting wants it to go on. I agree with Molly. Other board members. Okay.
I think a hand, not a agree. Yes, hi.
Yes, my name is Jen Moore, and I've been doing a ton of research on this. I'm just kidding. I've been reading Facebook comments. Literally, what I'm hearing over and over again is concern among certain community members about your role in your relationship with the superintendent.
Yeah.
So I think my question is, the implication is, will you be a voice independent of his voice? Is what I'm understanding that question to be, again, like via Facebook comment. So how to address that concern?
Yes. Yes. That's a great question. I also have read those comments. It's been the topic of a lot of, I would say I found it very confusing to hurtful, right? And also now I'm at a place, I was joking with my husband today where he was like, you are nobody's puppet. I was like, I know. But I think I take a lot of pride in my relationships, working relationships that I've made both with folks in the building and the students I've had an opportunity to work with, and with my colleagues in central office. And again, I think folks who know me and who've worked with me, I'm not adversarial for the sake of being adversarial, right? And I will hold my ground, right? Especially if I'm advocating on behalf of the needs of the students and the staff that I'm charged with supporting, right? So I know in listening to the faculty in this building, again, that they don't currently feel as well supported or as equally supported as other buildings in the district. That is a very key theme, right? And so that is absolutely something I'm clear that I will have to advocate on behalf of, right, or for, is greater resources, greater attention. And I think some of that's going to involve some pretty critical conversations, right? Again, to kind of rebuild some of that trust that's been broken along the way. So I would say that I'm aware of the concerns. I don't agree with the concerns. And I would say that doesn't track with how I've operated as an administrator. I've been not caught, but I've had to work in the middle, right? A lot in my prior administrative roles, right? Especially as a dean of students, you're always kind of operating in between people, positions of power, right? And so need to manage up, need to manage down, need to manage out. And I would say, having been a dean of students for 10 years, I've had a lot of experience with that. So I guess that's how I'd address that. Yeah.
In itself, there are a lot of strong personalities, strong opinions coming from this current board.
Correct.
Do you have any concerns about your ability to stand your own ground? And
I don't. I appreciate you asking the question. No, I don't. I think there's been, again, as I said earlier, I think my understanding of part of this role, a big part of this role, is advocating on behalf of the students and staff who are here and their needs. And they've made it pretty clear that they don't currently feel supported or respected often, right? And so I know I rest confidently kind of in that need and in that perspective. And, you know, if asked to move forward in this role, right, I will do some additional digging on what it is specifically that folks are needing. And we'll work to center that, again, not in an adversarial way, but in a clearer and more timely way with the board. Because I do, again, believe that I can't speak to anyone's intent. I don't think anyone steps forward to serve on a school board with the intent to cause harm. But I think there's no doubt that there's been harm, right? And so there's been the impact of some of the decisions and conversations have been very harmful, and people have left. And I don't want to see any more of that. It's so unnecessary, right? And it runs counter to what we're all trying to do. So I feel, again, confident in that kind of vision and that need. So I'm prepared to have those hard conversations. So yeah, thank you. Yes.
I just want to spin off on that. One day or that on Air Westminster. And I think what Jen's comment speaks to is when you spoke about belonging and that sense of community, transparency, and trust. I think the entire SU needs that platform restored. So that probably was the impetus of comments. People's lack of trust.
I agree.
A sense of that they don't belong. They're just taxpayers.
Yeah, they don't matter.
You know, so yeah, I'm sure it's nothing personal, just.
Yes, it felt that way at the beginning. I
But
will
understand there's a
Yeah.
greater
Yeah.
Rift.
Yeah.
that needs to heal.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, and I am one who has encouraged people to step forward and ask that we reopen the search because one candidate doesn't give us something to compare. It certainly is not my intention to suggest that I don't know you. I don't know anything about you, and I'm certainly not going to pretend that I have a specific problem with you. My problem is more with our board and with our superintendent and the fact that many people in this community stepped forward in support of Mr. Broadley staying. And so we didn't get any transparent answers.
Right.
And now we're not really getting transparent answers about why this is conveniently narrowed down to one person. And honestly, there was scuttlebutt long before it was even advertised that you were going to be the only candidate and that you would be selected. So that has been being talked about since before it was even advertised, even at the beginning of when the community was coming forward. So you can certainly understand why it feels like one more time we're kind of having the wool pulled over our eyes. And, and so it's concerning. And like I am holding out for reopen this. And if you are the candidate, then absolutely and best wishes and congratulations. But when we have one choice and no one seems to be listening to the fact that we'd like to see more options, I'm concerned about that.
I totally
decent options too.
Yes, some seasoned options.
I would say I share in the concern, right? And at 2:00 yesterday, honestly, I was like, I don't think I want to proceed because I think it runs in part counter to everything that I value, right? And I also wanted to honor the work and the perspectives of those who have contributed to the process so far that did advance me, right? So I felt very torn, right? And so I completely I appreciate you naming all those pieces. I wasn't aware of all of those pieces. Now I am, right? So
I want to add one more thing. And I anticipate that what will happen is that the board will declare you an interim and we're going to have to be appeased by that whole idea that it's only for now. And, you know, but please know that we received our superintendent that way. We did not have candidates. It was not advertised. He came in as an interim and now he's here. And so my feeling is, again, it is a very nice little trick to pull the wool over our eyes, to get us to all go off into our summer vacations, and then it is what it is. So.
No, I appreciate all of that. Yeah. Yes.
In the same vein as what Kim just said, I called the high school today to inquire as to how many original applications or applicants there were for the position. Nobody knew. They switched me up to the super's office. Nobody knew. They were going to call me right back. They didn't. I called again. Nobody can tell me the answer. The assistant to the superintendent couldn't tell me, oh, there were 4, there were 10. Nobody knows. That's not very transparent.
Sorry that I can't speak to any of those pieces. Obviously, I'm not privy to that information. I totally,
But
I get,
again,
yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
now we're down to 1.
Question.
Yeah.
Alex Stradling, parent, community member, and executive director of Fact TV. So I'm recording this for that. But on your thing, you would have to just file with the board, with the superintendent, a public right to know law. But,
Are you admitting?
yeah.
They can't say?
Just you write a formal letter. Yeah, I understand. And then you can, then they're required to provide that information or give you an answer why they can provide it. Just write a formal letter. Highlight the law. Communication. I think that's key. And I just wanted to. I think there's a lot of there is a lack of communication with the district and parents. I haven't heard the word parents in this conversation. There's a lack of communication about the processes and the opportunities that parents or people in the community have to have their voices heard. I don't think that's communicated well enough in terms of board meetings or the types of things that are on the agendas for board meetings, how you can appropriately get the information that you need. So what would what aspects of the lacking of communication and that trust that you have seen and that you think should be addressed? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's hard, right, for a lot of families to show up to board meetings, right? I think again, folks don't feel like, again, just I'm channeling what I've heard from parents, right? That they don't feel like it is an effective, fruitful conversation, right? And so I think it's seeking other opportunities to hold maybe not ongoing forums like board meetings, right? But maybe content specific or concern specific conversations, and not just in a one-off kind of way. Again, doing it at this time of day isn't going to work for everyone, right? Some people work right now. Some people have childcare, right? Like there's any number of reasons why this wouldn't be an accessible time. So I think it's providing those opportunities in multiple forums, right? Whether it's online and in person, daytime and evening, right? To be really intentional about that. In my experience, again, as an administrator, I find that those problem or opportunity specific conversations tend to generate a lot more engagement from families, especially when you hold it in a multitude of forums like that, right? As opposed to kind of these higher level things that are kind of ongoing, right? That again, folks don't necessarily feel like their opinion's going to matter. So I think it's providing opportunities for input where they can see the kind of tangible outcome, right? And again, I think from that, going back to fair process, this is what we've discussed. This is what we're hearing. Am I hearing this correctly? Are we hearing this correctly, right? And then partnering on the kind of solution-oriented pieces. And again, not just parents. I think the students, obviously, and the staff and others need to be involved too.
But I mean, I feel like that a lot of parents don't realize, or people in the community don't realize, that if they're not getting the communication or they have an issue at the school, that the easiest way for them to get their whatever issue that is addressed is by going to a board meeting or emailing the board members to have that addressed, because the boards are elected to represent the taxpayers and the concerns, and that's the best forum to address it openly in the public, unless it's a private issue. But I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like, a lot of parents don't realize that they can get their, if they're not getting that feedback that they need from the school,
Sure.
that they should go to the board and have that addressed.
Touch off
Yeah.
on that though. I feel that a lot of parents and community members have gotten frustrated because we do go to board meetings and then we get told, well, we can't answer that. So we go and we ask the questions, but then we don't get responses. So it's almost like, okay, so I need to carve this time out of my extremely busy life to go and ask the questions that I'm going to be told I can't get answers to. And that creates this frustration. So it's like, well, what's the point? Because they're not going to answer me anyways.
Yeah, and I understand that. And that's what we talk about. Communication is for people to understand that the board and school officials can't talk about personnel issues, as unless they want to, I mean, that's the huge stopper for any issue that's being talked, is anything that happens internally with personnel issues. And, that's the current situation that happened with Broadley. So they're not going to get an answer unless you want to hire a lawyer and figure out a loophole. But
Sure. Well, what is your vision for being visible, not only in school, but also in the community?
Great question. I love sports. I didn't touch on that, but I was, I would say in high school, sports are the only thing that kept me in high school. And it wasn't until college that I actually found a larger, I would say, more academic or intrinsic motivator to do the hard things, right? So I'm all in on the sports pieces, and I've gotten very clear feedback from the students, right, that they're very sensitive to the idea that, which I think is frankly valid, very valid, right? That the community only values certain sports or certain extracurriculars over others, right? So being very intentional about, bearing witness and celebrating not just sports, right, but all the kind of other extracurriculars that are very important to our students in the community as well. So I know my kids are very excited about the theater performances in particular. So yeah, very intentional. During school?
Yeah.
Yeah. My husband's also a school principal, and one of the things that I really love that he does that I would seek to emulate, right, is he does not schedule meetings during passing times in the day, right? Like he's very intentional about prioritizing presence and easy presence, right? And providing as many easy points of engagement for student as humanly possible, right? And so oftentimes that's just showing up in person at the start of the day, during break times, meals, things like that. And because not all of our students are going to feel comfortable crossing the threshold or coming forward with a need, right? We kind of got to put ourselves there early and often, if that makes sense. I saw one hand and then back to the back. Yeah.
So this question is not directed at you. It's directed at everyone here. So I'm Mark Gibo. For those of you who don't know, I'm a school counselor here and have been for the past 6 years. In the 6 years I've worked here, I've worked under 4 different administrators in our building, 4 very different administrators within our building. And with that comes a lack of consistency, a lack of expectation for our students, a lack of shared responsibility among the faculty, staff, and students. And I want to speak for just a moment about my experience working at Kelly. When I met Kelly earlier this year, I had never met her in my life. I was not part of the interview that brought her here, and I was really nervous. I don't like change. And so Kelly came in, and immediately I can say that I have never met or worked with such an intelligent, innovative, student-centered individual in my entire, I'd say 15 plus years career as an educator. Our community needs what Kelly can bring to us. And if you don't trust our board, if you don't trust our superintendent, trust me, trust the other faculty members here. We've been here, we lived this, we know our students and we know our community. Kelly is what we need. And I would really, really hope that you would consider that. I just want to say that. Thank you.
Is that one hand and then Molly, unless you want to?
I have a question. My name's Joanne Pluff. My daughter's a sophomore here. I have a question about your preparedness for dealing with the budget. I myself have some serious concerns about how the budget was gone about this year. It was voted on. A teacher, a spot was eliminated because there was issues with that. Additionally, I'm being told that now they want to combine the band instructor and the choral instructor together. As the granddaughter of a man who taught band here for 35 years, I am horrified. As a chorus student, I am horrified. There is no way that a band instructor and a chorus instructor can be one and the same. Something's going to suffer. And the theatrical performances that for a period of time we were known for are going to continue to suffer. I want a principal who's going to be prepared to look at the budget, come up with cuts where needed, because I think we are going to have to come up with cuts. Our population of students is shrinking. We have to deal with that. But I want a principal who's prepared to look at the budget and do the hard work on that. And what is your preparation for that when you step into this role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, I saw Miss McKay jumping up saying, it sounds like the role's been
We re-split it.
separated.
I made sure that we had a choir and a band teacher.
So in the
My
interest
concern is,
of,
is that going to stay? But is that going to stay, or is that going to be just a Band-Aid for this upcoming school year because that budget's already been approved?
I would hope so, but I was not a part of making the original budget, and I am, as the assistant principal, not a part of the next. Well, maybe I'll be a part of it. I don't know what's happening next year, but
I apologize. I'm usually an optimist, but this is the cynical part of me now.
yeah, fair.
That, okay, we're going to say it's 2 positions because we tried to get rid of 2 AP teachers, discovered we couldn't do it that way because the budget had already been approved. Our budget had already been approved for a band and a choir teacher. So that's something we can't do this year, but I'm already kind of seeing it happening. And I'm sorry, I kind of stole your turn, Molly. Is it okay if I?
right,
Sorry.
So what is your preparedness for getting in and working on the budget and overseeing that and helping to make the hard decisions, which I know we're going to have to make.
Right.
But keeping in mind that the theatrical singing musical playing students who don't play football
Right.
and soccer are going to be affected by this. And that walking into that band room and that chorus room gives them their outlet and their comfort and is their escape from all the pressures, just like walking out onto the football field or the soccer field is an escape for other students.
Right.
I just want to make sure that you have that facility to make the hard decisions, but to see the full scope of everybody. I think you can, but how are you going to go about doing it?
yeah, I would say that exact concern came through. That was one of the clearest concerns that came through from the students in particular, is this school, this community, we don't feel that they value these opportunities in the same way. And they saw that role being consolidated as yet another piece of evidence, right? That they're right. And I think it's critical, right? I think this goes back to the student voice piece. There are more and more school districts who are including their students in the budget design process, right? And again, not necessarily at every granular, like we're talking of salaries and benefits things, but programmatic, right? Like what do we value? Like budgets are a reflection of our values, right? And students need to be included in that. And not just students, right? Staff, faculty, right? Like parents, like there are a lot of voices that need to be engaged. In my opinion, that process needs to be started far sooner, right?
Yeah.
Far sooner. So, right. So a lot more, but not just like the actual like numbers piece, the what are we prioritizing? How do we know, right? What the priorities are, who we talk to, who didn't show up, who do we need to go and find, right? That you really have to do a better job of doing that. And I would say I think get at the heart of your question, that's absolutely what I've had to do, particularly in my role at Landmark, particularly in my role in working with student leadership, right? And it was hard because oftentimes the answer is, you can't do it. Or I advocated for it and the answer was no. Again, kind of being in the middle, right? But I think what's important to me is even when it's a no, but how can we still find a way to make this work, right? If not now, then when? And if not then, like, what are we going to do in the interim, right? Like there has to be some acknowledgement, right? And how are we going to move forward from that? So I think that's something that's very important to me that I did a lot in my role, with budgets in particular.
This meeting was recorded by Falls Area Community Television, located at 1 Hospital Court, Bellows Falls, Vermont. If you would like a copy of the meeting, our phone number is 802-463-1613 or email us at fact810@gmail.com. Falls Area Community TV, keeping government honest.